Hey, what you reading for?
Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel where I talk about books, literary, horror, classics, and contemporary. 2024, I decided, would be a year where I expand my reading horizons. So far this year, I have stepped out of my usual genres, and I have read a contemporary romance, I read a gay romance, and now extreme horror. This was not by design. What happened was that I watched a video by the creator BadisRad. I will leave a link to the video in the show notes. And in this video I watched, BadisRad talks about extreme horror, why she reads it, what she gets out of it, and why she believes that reading extreme horror is important. Now, given the clarity, thoughtfulness, and enthusiasm with which she expresses her ideas in this video, it was impossible for me not to be persuaded. So I read one of the books she recommended, and I have opinions. In this video, I will share with you my expectations, assumptions, and reservations going into this read, what I thought of the writing, the story, and the extreme violence that the story contains, and my overall take on the whole experience. Then I will go through and respond to a few questions that BadisRad asked in her video. Hopefully I can add something to this discussion. You will be the judge of that. If you are not a subscriber to the channel, I do thank you for stopping by. I hope you enjoy the content and I hope you consider subscribing. As the channel grows, so does my confidence and my willingness to try new things, to experiment and share my experiences with you in this open format. And I thank you for the support and encouragement. Extreme horror. Now, I read a lot of horror. Some of it is quite graphic, some of it is disturbing. I actually prefer it when it's graphic and disturbing, although I do prefer more disturbing on a psychological level. And my reservations with extreme horror are twofold. I do not react well to sexual violence, non-consensual sexual violence, sexual violence that is consensual. I think that's kind of interesting to read about. But it's the non-consensual sexual violence I have problems with. I don't really have the stomach for that, so if I come across a book that contains scenes like that, I will either DNF it or it often just ruins the reading experience. So my assumption is that extreme horror, that sexual violence is a common feature of extreme horror. I don't know if that's correct or incorrect, but that's my assumption. Also, it's the name of the genre, extreme horror, that gives me pause. Because it's called extreme horror, I'm thinking that writing quality, character development, story, and plot, that these things are afterthoughts. That really it's all about the graphic content. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's my assumption. The writing quality, I'm guessing, is not a priority for the readers or for the publishers of this material. For me as a reader, the writing quality is a high priority. I am unable to turn off the editor in my head. After years and years and years of editing novels and writing novels, I can't turn that part of my brain off. So the writing quality is a priority for me. If the writing is weak, even if the story is great, that I'm not going to end up connecting with the material. But there's only one way to find out if my assumptions are justified or not, and that's to get a book of extreme horror and read it. I went into this experiment in an effort to expand my reading horizons, but also to work on this skill of adjusting my mindset and being able to meet a book on its terms and appreciate it for what it is. I'm not getting so hung up on the writing quality, to be able to turn off the editor in my head, which I think would help me as a reader. It would help me enjoy more books. I mean, I'm happy that I have an editor in my head, that for professional reasons it's kind of necessary, but just to read for pleasure, I would like to be able to turn that off and enjoy more of the books that I read. So I'm making an effort in this experiment to work on that skill. So the book that I chose for this experiment was His Pain by Rath James White. And why did I choose His Pain? Well, I was familiar with the name Rath James White. I'm not sure exactly from where, probably from other booktubers who have talked about him, but he was on my radar. I read the synopsis, and I got the impression that there would be little to no sexual violence. BadisRad speaks highly of this book, and also it's short, about 110 pages. So because this is my first foray into extreme horror, and because given my reservations, the fact that it was short, that was a big selling point. So what is His Pain about? Well, there is a child is born with a peculiar neurological condition where all the information that his body receives is transmitted to the pain receptors in his brain. So everything he sees, hears, touches, smells, tastes, all of that is translated into pain. So the doctors, they say that he will only live for a few months, but his parents, they take a special care and they're very attentive. They create a room for him, which is to the best of their ability devoid of all stimuli. It's covered in latex. They prevent most light from coming in. They create a sleep deprivation bag for him to sleep in. The food they prepare for him is as bland as they can make it. When they speak to him, they speak as softly as possible, so they try to reduce the amount of stimuli that he receives, which is the amount of pain that he feels. And he actually grows up and lives to be a teenager. So the book really starts off with him as a teenager, or the story really takes off with him as a teenager. And one day the mother is watching daytime television, and she sees on a talk show this spiritual leader, this guru, who claims that through his specific techniques of meditation, he has found the ability to overcome pain. So she is intrigued by this. She contacts the guru and explains to him her situation with her son, and he agrees to come help her. Now, I will talk firstly about the length of the story, because that's going to affect other aspects of it. It's 110 pages, which I felt was too short to give me the kind of experience I really wanted. I would have loved for this book to have been longer, to about 250 pages or so. That would have been really nice, because some interesting concepts are introduced, but in 110 pages there isn't enough time to fully develop them or fully explore them. And that's the same for the characters. The characters we are presented with we're given hints that they could be interesting characters, but they're never taken. The time is not there to develop them properly. And what that ends up creating... Oh. Tu veux t'en aller? Okay, attends. All right. She has her claws dug into my shirt, and now she can't get free. Okay, there you go. So what that ends up creating is because these characters are hinted at psychological motivations or psychological background, but it's not really developed. So it creates a kind of red herrings, actually, and it's not a mystery. So the red herrings just ended up turning into really loose ends or ideas that were not properly developed. Just unfortunate. The writing is not as bad as I expected it to be. I read this book in more or less one sitting, which was great. I wouldn't go so far as to say it was good, but it wasn't bad, and it didn't distract me from appreciating the book, or appreciating the story. I wish that the editor had been more thorough, or that the manuscript had gone through another draft or two. I think it could have been significantly tighter and more polished. But as it was, it wasn't bad. The way the story is constructed and my experience with it reminded me of porno. Stay with me here. In the sense that we're given a setting and we're introduced to characters, but in a very superficial way, just like in a porno. Oh, here's the bored housewife, and now the plumber comes to the door, and all of that is just a premise to set up this thrilling scene that we have come for. So the book is kind of structured and gave me that experience, really. And I make the analogy to pornography. Even though pornography comes with it often negative connotations, I'm not making the analogy to make any kind of value judgment on his pain, or on extreme horror, or any moral judgment. I'm simply making the analogy to explain the effect it had on me, because while I was reading it, I found it thrilling and engaging, but when I was finished with it, it really had no staying power on me. It was an ephemeral, fleeting pleasure. I did enjoy the read. I think I enjoyed it for what it is. My guess is that in the annals of extreme horror, my guess is that his pain is one of the tamer entries. There were essentially 2 scenes of graphic violence, but I was expecting more. I wasn't disappointed, but I was expecting something a bit more difficult to read in those terms. But I have read horror that has been far more graphic and more disturbing than this book. A few titles that come to mind are Jack Ketchum's first novel, Off Season, Poppy Z. Bright's Exquisite Corpse, Anya Alborn's Brother, and Ryu Murakami, Piercing. I think all of those are more graphic, more extreme than His Pain. I do consider His Pain my first extreme horror experience, because although I have read horror that has been more graphic and more violent than His Pain is, this was the first time I went into a book that was labeled extreme horror, so I went in with those expectations and those reservations that come with it for me. My overall impression is that I feel like the reservations I had regarding extreme horror, I feel like they were to an extent justified. The writing was not as bad as I expected, but the story and characters, all of that seemed like an afterthought, or it seemed really just like a pretext to give us a few scenes of extreme violence. It was a fun read. It was a thrilling read, but ultimately it didn't really stay with me. It doesn't really have any staying power. I do enjoy graphic content, but I prefer it. I want to be challenged. I want to be psychologically or intellectually or emotionally challenged. And for that, I need well-developed, well-fleshed-out characters, and I need the themes to be properly explored. For me, the bar is set with a few of the titles I mentioned earlier. Exquisite Corpse by Poppy Z. Bright, which I thought was amazing, 5-star read. I made a video about that book, if you want to check out. Brother by Anya Alborn's Appalachian horror, graphic, violent, but psychologically interesting. And Piercing by Ryu Murakami, which I need to read more of Ryu Murakami. I made a video about that book as well. Those 3 books, that's where I set the bar. In terms of extreme horror, they're not labeled extreme horror, but they are quite graphic, quite extreme, more graphic, more extreme than his pain is. And yet those stories are well written, well told, and they take the time to develop them, and consequently, they have stayed with me more than I think his pain will. But I did like his pain. I liked it for what it is, and I did enjoy the experience. Now I will take the time to go through a few questions that BadisRad asks in her video.
Okay, so I did have some questions. Can extreme horror go too far?
I think that's the objective, right? That's the goal of extreme horror, to go too far. And where too far is, I think that will depend on each reader. I suspect that when an extreme horror writer creates, they might lose a few readers if the further they go, but I'm sure there will always be readers willing to follow them in their exploration of the extremes. So no, I don't think it is actually possible to go too far, but I do think that is the goal.
Okay, another question. Should us readers inform the community about triggers?
I think the trigger is in the name of the genre, actually. So I don't think, as a reader, I don't think it's fair to expect reviewers to give triggers. I do personally appreciate them because I don't want to read stories that feature sexual violence, and I don't want to read stories that torture children. And so I would appreciate the triggers, but I don't think it's reasonable to expect reviewers to give me those triggers. I think it's kind of up to me to perhaps read the synopsis, maybe read a few reviews before I jump into extreme horror. But yeah, not reasonable to expect reviewers to give triggers. It's in the name of the genre.
But after reading and enjoying and reading so much graphic extreme content, I'm numb. Like, I'm numb from it. Now, I need more. Is that wrong? My friends, is that wrong?
Does reading extreme horror desensitize the reader? I'm not convinced that would be such a bad thing, to be desensitized to extreme violence. That's a form of protection in a sense. The concern would come in if reading extreme horror would negatively affect someone's ability to empathize with people who are suffering or people who are victims of violence. And I would be very surprised if that were the case. When just the fact of reading, it's an exercise in empathy. We're putting ourselves in the place of someone else and experiencing their pain and their conflicts. And reading makes us more empathetic. The danger would come in when there is a glee about the violence, a celebration of it, and we are placed inside the perpetrator of the violence and experiencing their joy at inflicting pain. And I mean, I could see that as potentially being a problem, but that would depend on each reader. His pain does not feature that potentially problematic aspect. We are placed in the POV, the perspective of the young man who is inflicting pain on others, but there isn't this glee or celebration of the act of inflicting pain. I would be surprised if reading extreme horror had a negative effect on the reader, but each reader will have to make that determination for themselves. Hypothetically, I'm trying to imagine if I had children, if I had a teenager who was reading extreme horror, I would be curious and I would want to read what they're reading. And if I had a son or a daughter who read his pain, for example, I would not have a problem with that. My concern would come in when we are reading about someone inflicting pain. We are put in their perspective, and we are meant as a reader to to take part in the glee and the joy that they take in inflicting pain. This is something I came across with Richard Lehman's writing, his first book, Seller, and yeah, I found that problematic. So if I had teenagers who read Richard Lehman, I wouldn't stop them. I think that would be counterproductive, but I would definitely not encourage that. I would much prefer they read his pain than Richard Lehman for that reason. So that is my experience with extreme horror. The question is, do I want to read more from James White? Do I want to read more extreme horror? Well, I did like this book, and I do get it. I get why people would want to read extreme horror. I do like to be disturbed, and I do like graphic content, but I'm still wary of the title of the genre, extreme horror. I would prefer to find graphic content and disturbing content in books that have more literary ambitions, such as Poppy Z. Bride to Ryu Murakami. But I would, for what it is, sure, I would read extreme horror again. But because I only dabble in this genre, I would be curious to read another author. Even though I enjoyed his pain, I'd be curious to see what other authors have to offer. If you are familiar with extreme horror, perhaps there is an author you would want to recommend. I love receiving recommendations. If you are a fan of extreme horror, or if you are simply curious about it, I would encourage you to check out the channel BadisRad. I will leave a link to the channel in the description box. I look forward to connecting with you in the comment section. Thank you for watching. I'll see you at the next video.